When I was a couple weeks short of my 70th birthday, I started thinking about my mother's mother, who lived to be 100, and her mother, who lived to be 102, and my father, who lived to be 90, longer than anyone we had ever heard of in his family. I began to think that maybe our generation could be the first to routinely live to be 100. When I talked about this at family dinner one night, my granddaughter, who was 5, said,
"What are you going to do for the next 30 years, Grandpa?"
Hello, I'm Dr. Janet Price.
And I'm Gregg Kaloust. And we are Oldish. And this is our podcast, Oldish.
If you're oldish or know someone who is, please join us every week for conversations amongst ourselves
And our special guests
about what it means to be oldish in the 21st century.
If you ever wonder whether you're getting old, you're oldish. What are you going to do for the next 30 minutes? Hi, I'm Gregg, and I'm oldish.
Hi, I'm Janet, and I'm oldish. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Oldish, Conversations on Aging in the 21st Century. Gregg and I are so excited to have Leslie back here with us for our ongoing series of looking at books where the themes have something to do with oldishness. Today, we're going to be talking about the book, It's Not All Downhill From Here by Terry McMillan. There's so much to talk about. We want to jump in right away. So, Leslie, take it away.
Yeah, there is a lot to talk about in this book. It's not all downhill from here. So this book is the story of a 68-year-old woman and her plan to shake herself out of a midlife rut after her husband dies. So right in our wheelhouse. But before we talk about this book, I just want to give you a look at how successful Terry McMillan's writing career has been. Terry McMillan is an African-American writer, and she's oldish. She's 73 years old now, but she was 69 when she wrote this book. So she was born in 1951 in Michigan. Her father died when she was really young, and so she was raised by her single, very hardworking mother. She went to college, she studied journalism, and then she went right to work as a reporter. But later she decided that she wanted to tell stories instead of the truth. She didn't want to tell the truth. She thought stories were more interesting. So she became a novelist. I saw some interesting interviews of Terry McMillan, and she is a real character. She's also among the generation of women who had a career and kept that career through childbearing years. And then she wrote about it. Most of her main characters, all her books, are very well-educated career women trying to figure out how to manage the complexities of their lives and still have a career and a meaningful relationship. And McMillan did that, and she was determined to do that. She seems to me to be a very determined woman and very determined to succeed as a novelist. Her first book, Mama, which was published in 1987, that was her first big novel. She was unhappy with her publisher's promotion of this book, so she promoted it herself. She wrote to thousands of booksellers, especially African-American bookstores and booksellers. And pretty soon her book sold out of its first 5,000 copies. So that was her launch into her writing career. It was pretty impressive. And so her style kind of caught on. Her third novel, Waiting to Exhale, was on the New York Times bestseller list, and it sold over 3 million copies and is credited with having introduced the world of Black women professionals in their 30s who are successful, alone, available, and unhappy. And in 1995, Waiting to Exhale was adapted into a film that was directed by Forrest Whitaker. You all probably know him. He started out as a director before he became an actor. It starred Whitney Houston, an amazing cast, Angela Bassett, Loretta Devine, and Layla Rashawn. McMillan had similar success with her novel, How Stella Got Her Groove Back, which was also made into a movie that starred Angela Bassett. These might sound familiar to some of our listeners because I saw those movies and I remember McMillan kind of coming on the scene, and I read those books, and that's where we were at the time as women when she was writing these books. We were all trying to make it happen. So now let me tell you something about this story. We meet the main character, Larissa. She's about to celebrate her 68th birthday. And she's beginning to notice a few things about aging. One of them is that she's never going to look like she did at 67 as she gets older. At 67, we still look okay. We aren't looking really old yet, but in the next 10 years, the aging process really begins. She'll never again do some of the things that she can do now or that she used to be able to do. And of course, you guys can all chime in on this because you probably had some of the same thoughts. I mean, she never thought she'd need Social Security or Medicare. And for me, that was like something way down the line. But here we are. Here I am, using both Social Security and Medicare. And she can't believe that she's recently lost a good friend to cancer, that friends, peers are dying. And of course, when someone dies, you begin to ponder your own death. So these are things that she's thinking about. And there are plenty of oldish themes in this novel.
Yeah, I wonder which oldish themes jump out to each of us, because like you said, Leslie, there are so many oldish themes there. I love it that, like you're saying about waiting to exhale and when Stella got her groove back, we kind of grew up with her as she was growing and aging. We were growing and aging. And so for her to come out with this book, It's Not All Downhill From Here, that's the theme of this podcast. It's not all downhill from here. It doesn't have to be. And it feels like Larissa and her friends and family, that's their struggle throughout the book. Is it all downhill from here? Can I pull myself together? Is there more for me? And all the pieces of family. I mean, I guess one theme that really sticks out for me that I just love is the reality that we can keep on going, that things can continue to change, to become, we can make peace with family members. We can create family, and all these things are in the book. We can decide that we want to pay attention to our bodies, even as they're aging and we're losing some of what youth was. We can still choose to be as healthy as possible. Her beauty salon burned down. She built up another one. Her husband died at the end of the book. It looks like she's heading into a new relationship. Her daughter's struggling with addiction and the pain of that, and then seeing that there's possibilities along the way for change and becoming.
I said earlier before we started to record that my opinion was that this book has so many oldish themes that it's almost like a handbook. Before we started the podcast, we made a list of all of the things that are important to people as they age, and she checked them all off. I'm pretty sure every single one. So while I was reading it and thinking about talking about it in our book club here, and I think I said in one of the book club episodes that reading a book in a book club for me is way different from just reading a book, because as I'm reading it, I'm thinking about, we're going to talk about it. So what kind of things might we talk about? And one of the things is that I personally have absolutely no experience being an African-American or a woman. So it was very interesting for me for the very clear picture of African-American womanhood that she expressed. So I think that is also part of the themes here. But I have a lot of experience being an oldish human being, and she really did touch on so many of them, a lot of which we talked about: taking care of an aging parent, taking care of a sibling that's got issues, taking care of children that have issues and some children that don't have issues, and being a long-distance grandparent. I really enjoyed, enjoy might not be the right word, but I really was impressed by how she communicated the experience of people saying to her over and over again, you need to lose some weight. You need to take better care of yourself. You need to watch out for diabetes. You need to do all of this stuff, as we've all heard over and over again. And she went through the stages of hearing it from everybody, and then one day noticing in the mirror that she better do something pretty quick here. And the start and stop of the losing weight and getting in fit and getting active, the start and stop. And the final moving into the flow of that was right on the money as far as I could tell. It really described that, or it didn't describe, it showed that process really clearly and really well. everything that you can think of as an oldish theme is in this book. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of joy. Janet, you mentioned making family. There's a lot of intentional family. Turns out that some of her family that she made that she thought was family, turns out not to be family. And so what? Who cares, right? It was her attitude. It's like, doesn't matter whether you're related to me or not. It's great. Yes.
Yeah, you really outlined a lot of the issues. And I like that you started out, Janet, with saying which of these issues really resonates with you. And in some ways, it's hard to choose because so many of them do. But for me, the one about grief really resonated with me because I just lost my father. He was 99 years old in October. And, and that felt really oldish, like he's 99, I'm 71. I'm lucky to have had a dad that long. So for her, it was great. It was cathartic for me to read it because, it was hard. It's harder, I think, to lose a spouse because you're dealing with so much loneliness, eating alone, being alone, moving things out of your house that belong to that person. There are so many sad sort of oldish things. Loneliness, I think, in general, is a really big issue for elderly people. Losing parents is one thing, but she's beginning to lose friends. One of her good friends, Poochie was her name. She died. I think she had, I don't remember what she died from. Do you remember what she died from, Janet?
Pretty much everything.
Oh, colon cancer, yeah. Her friends hadn't heard from her, and so they were concerned, and they drove down to see her, and they found her lifeless in her bed. That was a very powerful scene and something that people experience. And she also talked about her mother being in assisted living. And I think my father experienced some of this when he was in assisted living too. He felt lonely, even though he was in this place with a whole lot of other people who were in the same situation as him. There was still a lot of loneliness. He had his own room and he was in his own room. And at one point, my father said this exact thing to me that Laritha's mother said to her, that she was afraid to make friends at the assisted living place because everybody's dying. That was sad, but also very real. But the other one that really resonated with me, and I think all three of us, especially you and I, Janet, and many other of our listeners out there experience this, is being a grandparent from afar. I have one granddaughter, and my son and his family just moved to Singapore. And I really related to her as her son was in Japan, married to a Japanese woman, and my son is married to a Korean woman. So for me, there were all these similarities to what she was going through in her life, having kids so far away and traveling so far to see your family. That gets harder as you get older. So she talks about that. She talks about how exhausted she was. She had this list of all these things she wanted to see in Japan, but she didn't really see them all. She missed her bed, she missed her food, she missed seeing other Black people, which I thought was interesting. Yes. She said that, and I could just totally relate to that.
Yeah, I feel like she did such an amazing job of walking us through the journey of these experiences. So whether it was not paying attention to her body as it was aging and then suddenly kind of having to or needing to, and the long distance grandparenting, I felt like she went through the journey of, at first it seemed like to her that her son and daughter-in-law weren't that interested in her coming to visit, that she wasn't on their radar. And then as it went along, they kind of invited her. I mean, just the whole thing of the distance. And then when she finally said she was going to come, then all of a sudden it snowballed in this positive way of, well, now they're going to come here. And so a couple of themes for me is that it's not over till it's over, that where there's life, there's hope, and the need for acceptance and grieving. I feel like she did a great job with all of that.
Yeah, I find myself having those conversations more frequently with friends about health issues. We used to call those organ recitals. It's from another book that I read. I don't remember what book it was. But,
That's so funny.
Everybody checks in and says, oh, yeah, I saw my doctor and my blood pressure is really high, or now I'm taking medication for cholesterol. And, she had all of those where I'm pre-diabetic and I have to stop eating sugar. And I know I should swim more, but I don't, conversation. And
Yes.
what are you doing for exercise? Everybody has that conversation with their oldish friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that the conversation, I think it was with her mom, where her mom said, well, just, as you know, it's all downhill from here. And she challenged her and said, no, I don't think it's all downhill from here, which is obviously where the title of the book came from. And so I also felt like it was just capturing the theme of our podcast. It's not all downhill from here. And so it is this process of that friends encourage and support and help us, family sometimes. But, something you said, Leslie, I just feel like is so, for me, deep around aging, which is like what your father was saying, that it is lonely. And the book talking about not wanting to make friends in the assisted living because nobody's going to be around that long. And then the piece of that we do die alone, in the sense that it's a very personal, individual experience. And I don't know what it's like to be old, that much older, like near your father's age. I know, Greg, your parents lived into their 80s and 90s. As you see people dying around you and realize that no matter what friends you make, it's not going to be long term. When I start thinking that way, I come back to something that was said in the book, which is someone was saying one day she'll be old too, if she's lucky. And that's such an important theme that it's easy for me to forget, that it's a gift to age, to still be alive as we get older, even with all of these things that are what comes with aging, but that it's a gift.
It does seem like a gift. And I think I really like the phrase, it's not all downhill from here, because my first thought when I read it was downhill is a coast. If you're going downhill, you're coasting. And it also, the way the phrase is always used is it's just getting worse and worse and worse. That's what most people think of when they think of it's all downhill. But if it's not all downhill from here, also implies that sometimes you're going uphill, which is hard, right? So the next bit, it's not just a coast. We're not going to coast into this graceful, beautiful old age where, it takes some work. You got to get up and go to the gym. You got to do your work. People are going to die on you. So there's bumps, and it's more like moguls. It's all downhill, but there's a lot of moguls in it. And, you're going to be doing some flying flips and twists here. And so I really like that phrase. I like every phrase pretty much that has more than one way to look at it, because it's really rich language if it tells you more than one thing.
You mentioned, Greg, that this is a book about women, but I think these are universal themes. And I'm sure you probably agree with that. You did sort of agree with that it's not really, it is gender specific in many ways, but a lot of the grandparenting from afar and health issues and retirement and caring for our aging parents. I mean, those are all grief. Those are all pretty common themes as we age. But all the women in this novel work, as you said, Greg, and I agree, work really hard and make sacrifices in their lives for their parents who are, if they're still alive, who are aging. So they're taking care of them and their adult children who are launching off into the world, and some are having an easier time of that than others. Some of our children need a lot more support, than others do. Some are facing things like addiction or losing jobs, or where others are very successful. Her son in Japan and has 2 children and is very happy, but her daughter's struggling. So that's a nice juxtaposition, that she does with those characters, because that's pretty much the 2 extremes that we struggle with our children. And sometimes we don't like our adult children, and sometimes they don't like us. But I think that's partly that is that they're just trying to push us away to establish their own lives. And that's the kind of grief and acceptance that we have to work on. It's hard work. And then there are siblings, like in the book, Larissa visits her sister Odessa and her mother a lot, and is always checking in on how her daughter's doing, and babysits for her great-grand. So that's all of those things that she mentions are such common things that we do as grandparents, great-grandparents, whatever. And that's where the work comes in. Because as you said, Jan, we're a little bit, as we get older, we become marginalized. So we kind of have to fight a little bit harder for our place in the family or our place in our community, our societies, and work on keeping our friendships and keeping that sort of loneliness at bay.
That was really near the end of the book. Laritha's son, Jackson, she had come back from Japan and she was talking to her friends, and someone said, "Is Jackson really coming home?" And she said, "Yes, he is, just like the rest of us." And it made me think of the last book that we reviewed, Walking Each Other Home. It just was something about that, like Jackson's coming home in this plane of right now, but yes, just like the rest of us, we're all coming home. So that was fun for me.
Yeah. I really like the growth of all of the characters, really, except for the ones who died. All of the characters seem to grow in acceptance, tolerance, appreciation, love. Was modeled by Laritha's mother, who would sit in a nursing home and say pithy things about everybody's good, you see the good in everybody, and so on. And you could really see it in Laritha's growth and her attitudes and acceptance of things like when someone important in her life revealed that he was gay, it's like, okay, that's great. That's fine. I'm glad you found somebody to love. Well, my boyfriend is white. Well, okay, that's great. I'm glad you found somebody to love. That's really a good thing. And she grew in particular, because she was the main character, she grew into love and acceptance of people who, through a lot of the book, kind of graded her the wrong way. Her previous husband's sister was somebody that she badmouthed through 2/3 of the book, and then finally embraced. Her own sister, she kind of badmouthed her through 2/3 of the book, and then finally embraced her. One of the friends of this small group of women who were kind of family to each other, one of them was just really irritable and unpleasant through a lot of the book, and the other women stuck with her, and she came through the other side of it. There's one quote that I'd like to read from toward the end of it, where Laritha is talking to her sister, Odessa, and she says, "I think we're all finally trying to set sail, Odessa, and it feels like the wind is blowing in our favor." So
nice.
yeah, so that's the moral of the story, I think, right there. That's just, and it's just really sweet the way that it came. I do have one comment about how the men were handled in the book. I know a lot of men write books and the women aren't. The women are put in a role rather than be people. And for the most part in this book, the men were either dead or gay or children, or there was something else bad about them, and or they were sex objects.
That's an interesting reversal.
Yes. So I think that the way that she flipped that on the typical male authoring was just really, and was subtle as heck. I didn't notice it until toward the end, when I was like, hey, wait a second. All the people, there were no live men who are active participants in this story.
It's true. And she starts out by killing off her husband immediately.
Yes. Well, we want to be clear. Laritha didn't kill the husband.
No, she didn't kill her husband. Yes. Yeah. The writer kills. I mean, by she, I meant the writer. Yeah. No, she's great at introducing these conflicts and then tying up all the loose ends at the end. She does a lot of that, and she does it with a lot of her main characters. But you're right, Greg, about the men. They are a little bit marginalized in this story, because it is a story about women mostly. Most of her books are about women. And in most of her books, the men are not always that great. There's not a great light shed on the men. Usually they're cheating on their wives, or they're not telling them things. Even in this one, I mean, she found out later that her husband had a heart condition and never told her two things. And he had some secrets, and also found out that he had a son from another relationship who happened to be gay. As you said, he was a gay young man. And that was interesting. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it does feel like something you said a little bit ago, Leslie, about the themes of grief and acceptance, which I feel like are the big themes of being oldish and aging, is grief and acceptance. And that was a theme that was just throughout the book, which is part of being oldish. But I definitely feel like this is almost like an anthem for oldishness. It's like, it's not all downhill from here. It might be up, it might be challenging, it might be grief and acceptance, but it's not all downhill.
No, I mean, there are some new beginnings in this book when Larissa is deciding about retirement, but she closes her shop after Carl dies and is trying to figure out Carl's her husband. And so towards the end, she has two beauty supply stores. And then she decides to open a new place and start over. So towards the end of the book, she has this grand opening. I love the way she wrapped that whole piece up. It's sort of a big party at the end. She has this grand opening for her new beauty shop that sells beauty supplies, and people are coming in and everybody's all dressed up fancy and they're getting makeovers, and she has all these good makeup artists there to do that. And there's just this whole wonderful general celebration at the end of her and her friends and their lives and her sisters, and her daughter even comes around, goes into rehab and gets better. So she ends it on a very high note. So it's got a really good arc in that all these interesting people, and they all have their issues and their conflicts and their problems, and they either learn to cope with them or they pass away or they come out okay on the other end, sometimes reinventing themselves. Her other friend, Lucky, I think, was having a hard time in her marriage. And that's another theme McMillan has a lot in her books, divorce and conflict in relationships. But even that, she starts smoking more marijuana and she's having a hard time. So she brings in these things that people do to help themselves to cope that doesn't always work. But then they overcome it and things get better.
Yes. Makes me think about, when you're talking about new beginnings, that made me think about birthing this next chapter in our life, and how being pregnant, birthing is a big process. It's painful. It's scary, but is producing this new life, or in this situation, this context, new chapter. So meaning it's bumpy and there is grieving, but there is acceptance. And then that makes room for what can be.
Yeah, and she does that in the end of this book, because her best friend among all of her many friends, Corinthia, falls in love with Henry, and they get married, and they met on a senior dating site, and they get married, and it's a whole new beginning for her best friend. And in the final chapter too, when Larissa finally decides to start taking a fitness class, which she does, not very consistently in the beginning, but she keeps going. And you're rooting her on. I mean, I'm rooting her on, saying, yeah, go to that class. You've lost weight. You're doing good. You're getting healthier.
Yes.
And then when she comes back from Japan, she goes back to her exercise class and she meets a man named James. And it sort of ends like, oh, okay, maybe she's going to find love again.
Another thing you made me think of, Leslie, about Larissa, as far as like going to the gym class, the fact that she decided to learn how to swim at 68, 69 was extremely impressive. It's just the examples that give us these messages that it's not all downhill. There's places to go, things to do, things to try, new challenges to face. And I feel like it's a very hopeful book around aging.
Oh, yeah,
and
she gave me a lot of hope.
Realistic and hopeful, yeah.
Well, yeah, no, she motivated me. I mean, after I closed this book, the next day I started going swimming again. That's neat. She motivated me. Yeah, it was motivating in that way. You're right.
So this is our book, and I'm glad that we had a chance to read it and talk about it together, and get some continued affirmation that this is a very fascinating time of life, and we all have the gift of being in it right now.
Yeah, and I'm really grateful to Terry McMillan for having written this, because it brightened my day up every time I went back to reading it, and the ending of it and the whole swoop of it was just encouraging in the true meaning of the word encourage. I feel a lot braver about the world now than I did before. So we're very grateful to her for having written a book that is just so relatable. It wasn't flowery or pretentious or overly literate in any way, but it was so perfectly written, in my opinion, that it was just totally real. And that's the kind of book I like.
Yeah, it was a very enjoyable read, and I would recommend it, to our Oldish community.
Me too. It's got the stamp of approval from the Oldish podcast.
It's coming up on time for us to put an end to this discussion. We'll be back for more of these. The Oldish Book Club is practically my favorite part of the whole podcast enterprise that we've engaged in. I always enjoy hanging out with you two for a while, and I really am appreciating the opportunity to read a book with other people. And it's always a great pleasure to hang out with you two and hear what you're thinking and learn what I'm thinking and or what I should be thinking. And so thanks. It was nice seeing you both.
It's good to see both of you. And thank you, Greg. That's very sweet. I feel the same way.
And fun to talk about books again.
Yes. So we'll be doing this again soon. And in the meantime, Greg, did you have an announcement you wanted to make?
Well, I did. I just wanted to say that I've decided as part of my oldishness that instead of thinking about, wouldn't it be nice to write some things and have other people be able to read them, as I have been thinking my whole life, this week I started a Substack. I'll put a link to it in the show notes if anybody wants to go check it out. And I also want to point out that our website, www.oldish.me, has a blog feature on it. And yesterday, for the first time, I posted a blog for a couple of reasons. One is to announce that this weekend we're talking with someone Janet knows from playing pickleball, who's written a book on how to avoid pickleball injuries. And we're going to be talking with her this weekend. And it's a perfect book to gift to folks for the upcoming holidays. It's a nice little gift for your pickleball friends. And that reminded me that we had talked to other people about their pickleball books over the last couple of years. And so on the blog, I put links to those books that were written about pickleball. And so you can go and check those out on our blog at www.oldish.me.
Great. Awesome.
Yes.
Greg, what's the name of your Substack?
Kaloust Substack.
Okay.
It's pretty tricky. GregKaloust.substack.com.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, happy holidays, everybody.
Yes, happy holidays. Oh, one other thing I did want to say, I mentioned this in the blog, is that we know that all of our listeners have it as a New Year's resolution to listen to more Oldish podcasts. And so we have a New Year's resolution to make more of them. We've got 3 upcoming right away that'll get published this year. And then after the first of the year, we'll be much more frequent in our publishing of podcast episodes. So happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Bye, Greg.
holidays.
Bye, Leslie.
Bye, everyone.
That's it for now. Thanks for listening. As always, we greatly enjoyed this meeting of the Oldish Book Club, featuring this time Terry McMillan's It's Not All Downhill From Here. You can find a link to purchase Terry McMillan's books on Amazon in the show notes. Please be aware that if you buy one of these books after clicking on the link, we may get a small commission. You can think of it as an easy way to help support the podcast. If you want to be more direct in your support, there is a link on our website, www.oldish.me, where you can pledge as little as $5 a month that goes to help us pay the costs of producing the podcast. Our next episode, due out next week, is a lively conversation with Frances Reaves, author of Boomers Booming, How to Thrive After 65 and Have Good Sex. Meanwhile, please like and review Oldish wherever you listen to podcasts, which helps the algorithms tell strangers about us while you tell friends about us. Have a great holiday season and a fabulous new year, and don't forget to love everyone.